Hello everyone, this is Mahmoud and welcome back to my another YouTube video tutorial. In today's lesson, I will discuss about Dart programming language which will help you to be a Flutter developer. To install Dart SDK in your system, please visit https and dart.dev, and here you will see that there is a get Dart link. Just click that on that menu. And here you will see there is 3 versions: Windows, Linux and Mac. So if you are using Windows, just follow the instruction to install Dart SDK in your system. As I use Mac, so I followed this Mac instruction and I already installed Dart in my system. Currently there is version 2.3 which I am also using for this lesson as well. To write Dart code, you can choose any editor, but I personally prefer Visual Studio Code Editor. So if you want to use Visual Studio Code Editor, you can install from this web page, and there is also Mac, Windows and Linux version. As I'm using Mac, so I install the Mac version. Also, if you do not want to install the Dart SDK or the Visual Studio Code Editor in your system, you just want to check out Dart by just typing the code in a web editor, you can just use the Dartpad. So the address is dartpad.dartlang.org. Here you will see this interface, and for example here is a main function, and suppose here I write print hello world 1 and I just click run, and it will compile the program and show the output in the right side window. So if you want, you can also use this Dartpad, but I personally prefer to use Visual Studio Code Editor and run Dart code in the system. So currently I open my Visual Studio Code Editor, and here you will see the Visual Studio Code Editor, and to highlight the syntax, you should install a Dart extension. To install Dart extension in the Visual Studio Code Editor, you have to click view, then here you will see extension, just click on it, and here if you search Dart, you will see Dart 3.1.0. there is an extension which I already installed. So if you are using Visual Studio Code Editor, you just find out this Dart extension and click install, and it will be installed in your Visual Studio Code Editor. And then if you click view explorer, then you will see this interface as well. So currently I created this playground.dart. So Dart code extension is DART. So I created this playground.dart file in my desktop demo directory, where I will write some code and execute in the terminal. So if you do not see any terminal window in Visual Studio Code Editor, just click terminal and then click new terminal. So here you will get the current directory location automatically. So if I want to run this playground.dart, so what I have to type dart and then the file name, so playground.dart in my case, and if I click run, I can see the output of the program here. So I do not need to open this terminal window separately. I just can use this built-in terminal feature in Visual Studio Code Editor. Dart is a static type programming language. It is also a compiled programming language. So static type means if you define a variable as string, you cannot assign other values like integer or double on that string type variable. Though there is an exception, like there is a type called dynamic which you can use to store any kind of values. I will discuss that on later. Another thing is that Dart supports 2 types of compilation. One is called AOT or ahead of time, another is called JIT or just in time compilation. So when we want to run a Dart program, we have to compile it and then run, but it happens automatically. So when we write a Dart program and we just run, it automatically compiles on the fly, and this is called just in time compilation. And when we deploy our final product, then it will be compiled as AOT or ahead of time compilation with some optimization. Let's write a Dart program. So every Dart program starts with the main function. So let's write a main function, void main. So here main is a function, and void means this function returns nothing. If we want, we can avoid this void so it is optional. So that means if there is no return type, that is called this function does not return anything. So let's define a variable. So I type var first name, and here I assign my name Mahmoud, and then suppose I want to define another variable last name. So in this case I will type string last name Asan, and now I want to print this. So first name then last name. So if I here I have to put a plus sign for string concatenation, and if I want to run this program I have to type dart playground.dart. Here you will see the output Mahmoud space Asan. So what does it happen in here? So at the first line, number 2, here I define a variable using the var keyword. So var means a variable, and the variable name is first name, where I have assigned Mahmoud as the value. So when you define a variable like this way, Dart compiler automatically guesses that this is a string type values, because, and this is called type inference. And in the second type, line, the third line, we define the variable as string type, and which we mention it in the before. So if you defined variable like this way, that string last name, you cannot assign other values. Like if I type 2, it will show an error, but in the first case if I type 2 here, it will not show an error in here, because in that case it will understand that this is a integer value. So you have to remember this thing in Dart programming language, that it supports both type inference and statically type defined. So when we type dart playground.dart, there is just in time compilation happens. So this code will compile on the fly, and then it will run, and we can see the output in the terminal. If there will be an error, we can see that error also in here. Another thing is that all the built-in Dart libraries like built-in types collection and other core functionality for every Dart program basically is defined in a package that is called dart core package. So if you want to import, you have to type this import, then single quote dart then core package. But the thing is that if I run this program again, nothing will be changed, it will run as usual. But the thing is that this dart core package automatically imported. So for this case or normal cases, we do not need to import this dart core package. It will be imported in every Dart program automatically. So let's write another program. In this program we want to take input from user. So for this input output operation, we have to import a library that is called IO library. So I have to import then dart IO. And now let's write a main function, and here I want to first show user that you have to type your name. So I have to write a code like standard out dot write line, and here I will write what is your name, and then a question mark, and then I will take the input from user. So for this reason I will type string name, and then standard in dot read line sync, and then I will print that name. So my name is $name. So let's run this program first. So you see in the screen it is showing what is your name. If I type Mahmoud Asa, you will be seeing that it is showing my name is Mahmoud Asan. So basically this standard out and standard in this library is defined in this dart IO package. So at the first line we are showing user that by writing standard out dot write line, that means this line is shown in the terminal. Then in this line standard in dot read line sync, this when the program found this line, it will wait for the user to give an input. So when we get the input from user, we assign that variable which is a string in this name variable, and finally we just using the built-in print method or print function to output the name in the terminal. And here you will see within the string we are using a $sign and the variable name. So this is called string interpolation. So within the string we change a variable with the real value. We can write comment in 3 separate way in a Dart program. So if you want to write a comment inline, then you have to use 2 /, that is called inline comment. If you want to write block comment, then you have to use / and you have to end the comment using another star and /. So here we can write multiple line of comment. And another comment is 3 /, that is called documentation. So that will be used as a document for your program. There are 2 type programming language. One is called strongly typed, another is called dynamic type. So in strongly typed programming language like C++, Java or Swift, the type of a variable is known at compile time. And another type programming language that is called dynamic type like Python, Ruby or JavaScript. In these programming languages, the type of a variable is known at runtime. So in Dart programming language, there are 5 basic type like int, double, string, bool and dynamic. These 4 types are fundamental type, and dynamic is a dynamic type. That means we can change the value at runtime with different type values. So in this example, let's define a variable. So int for integer, amount1 is the variable name where we have assigned 100. Then in the second line we have defined var amount to 200. So in this case, by using the var keyword we define a variable amount to. So as it is 200, that is an integer value, so the Dart compiler automatically knows that this is a integer value and integer variable. So Dart compiler make this amount to an integer. So next time if we assign other value like double or string in this amount to, it will show an error. And in the third line we have just print this amount1 and amount2. Then we define another variable using double and put a double value, and then in the second cases we have defined the double variable but using the var keyword. So the variable value type will be determined at the compile time. Then we also print that value as well. Then we define another variable name1, which is a string type. We define in by mentioning string, and in that second cases we define name2 as a string variable using var keyword, but here the type inference occurred. Here we define is it true 1 using the bool keyword. That means this is a boolean type variable where we have assigned true. This is a boolean value, and then using the var keyword we define another variable is it true 2, where we define false value, which is also a boolean value. So both of these variables are boolean type. And finally we define a variable weak variable, and where we have used the keyword dynamic. So this weak variable is a dynamic type variable. So the value type can be defined at the run type. So at the first time we have assigned 100, and the second type we have assigned Dart programming, which is a string, and the first time it was a integer. So let's run this program. We see that this program is run perfectly well. So here we see that amount1 100, amount2 200. This print line is printed in here. Then we printed the floating point values using this line print. So we are seeing that this values is also printed correctly. Here we are using this my name is, this thing is also printed in here, and we can see this true and false, these two variable, the boolean type variable values are also printed in here perfectly well. And finally this dynamic type weak variable, which we have assigned 100, it is printed in here. And the next time we change the value of this weak variable as string type, we have seen that this is also printing correctly. That means this weak variable, which is dynamic type, we can assign any type of value at any time. So this is the fundamental or primitive type in Dart programming language. And one thing you have to remember, that Dart is an object oriented programming language and everything is object in here, even the null type. So null type means if we assign here weak variable and just put null, that means there is nothing. And if I just type print weak variable in this case, and let's try to run this program, and you see it is showing null. So even this null type is also an object. So everything is object in Dart programming language. This integer value, this variable, everything is object. Even this function is also an object, which is a subtype of the function class. We can define a string variable using single quote or double quote. So if you start defining a string using single quote, you have to in that string using single quote as well. The same rule is applied for double quotes as well. So here S1 is defined a string variable using single quote and S2 is defined using double quote. In the S3 variable we using a single quote, and we also want that there is an apostrophe within the its keyword. So in this case we have to use a backward slash to separate this single quote within the string. But if we are just using this double quote to define a string, we can just replace this special character by the single quote. And finally, if you want to define a raw string means if there is a special character, that is new line character, suppose, it will not be evaluated. So to define a raw string, you have to just put a R in front of the string. So let's run this program. You see the single quote, this string is printed, double quote string is also printed, and here it's, you see that this apostrophe is showing here nicely also for the S4 variable as well. And in the final case, the raw string, you see this new line character is not evaluated because it is defined as raw string by using the R in front of the string. String interpolation means to replace a variable's value, actual value, within a string. So here we have defined a variable age where we have assigned 35, an integer value, and in the second string variable we replace this age variable's value within the string by using this $sign. So that means when you want to interpolate in a string, just use the $sign in front of the variable name within a string. So if we run this program, we see the output is showing correctly that my age is 35. We can define multi-line string in Dart programming language using either 3 single quotes and ending with 3 single quotes, or starting with 3 double quotes and ending with 3 double quotes. So if I run this program, you see it is showing the multi-line string in the terminal. Type conversion is a very important topic in any programming language. Sometimes we need to convert an string to an integer, and sometimes we need to convert an integer to a string. To convert an string to an integer value, you can use the parse method of int object. So here we are passing an string 1, and this method parse will convert this string 1 to an integer 1 and assign that value in this one variable. In the next line, we are using the built-in assert function to verify that. So here we are verifying that if 1 equal to integer 1, if it is not true, then it will show an error in the terminal. Similarly, if we want to convert an string to double, we can use the parse method defined in the double object. So let's run this program. You will see there is no problem, no error is showing. That means this parsing occurred correctly. But if we want to change the string like this string, there is no integer value within this string, then what happened? Let's write this program. You see it is showing an error that this parse method tried to convert this string to an radix 10 number, but it found that there is str characters. So that means it cannot convert this str to an integer value. That's why it will be thrown an error. And this exception is called format exception. So you have to make sure that if you want to convert an integer or double value, string value, to an integer or double primitive value, then you have that string with that integer or double value. Similarly, if we want to convert from integer to string, we can use that here 1.toString method. So that means, as I said before, that everything in Dart programming language is an object. So that means here the numeral value 1 is also an object. So we can use this toString method of that object. So here we are typing 1.toString and we are converting this integer value to an string value and assign this in 1 as string variable, and in later we also using this pi values, that is double value, to as string. So here we have to use toString as fixed 2. So here basically we want to convert this 4 floating point number to 2 fixed point floating point numbers. So let's run this program. And you see there is no error. So that means this one integer is converted to as string, which we are verifying in here by putting single quote outside of 1. That means it's an string and it asserted correctly. Similarly, here we converted this double value to 2 fixed point double string. So and we are verifying here that if this is as string with 2 fixed point number, and we found that yes, it is also asserted correctly in here. So that means 3.1.4 now is an string value. So this is how we can convert any type to any type in Dart programming language. When we define a variable, we can define that variable as a constant type. That means during the runtime we cannot change the value of that variable. So to define a variable as constant in Dart programming language, we have to use the keyword const. So here we have defined a variable a const num, and this is an integer constant because there I have put a 0 which an integer. So by type inference the compiler will make this variable as integer constant. Similarly, a const bool is a boolean constant and a const string is an integer string constant. Then we are printing these 3 variables here, and also the next 3 line we are checking the runtime type. That means what type the compile created during the runtime. So let's run this program. You see where we are seeing 0 to a const string and the type is int, bool and string. So this is how we can define constant type in Dart programming language. Suppose we defined a variable like int and num and did not assign any value within this variable. If we just use the print function and try to print the value of this num variable, let's run this program and see what is shown in the terminal. It is showing that there is null. That means there is no value assigned in this variable. So you have to keep in mind that if you define a variable or object but did not assign any values on it, that means that's an empty. So it contains the null object. We can also externally use null in this case. So if I run this program again, you see there is no change. So that means if we did not explicitly assign null value within a variable, it automatically assign if there is no real value assigned to this variable. If you know other programming language like JavaScript, C++, Swift or Python, all the standard operators will work in Dart programming language. So for example, if you want to add 2 values, you can just use the plus sign. For negative minus, you can use minus sign. For if you want to see that if there is any remainder or not, you can use the modulus operator, that is also called percentage operator in some programming language. And if you want to check relational value, like if 2 values are equal or not, for example here using this if logic, we are checking that if num equal to 0 or not, then print 0. For not equal to, you can use not equal to this operator, and for greater than or equal to, you can use this greater than and equal sign, and less than and equal sign for less than or equal to operator. If you want to use any shortcut value, like for example, if for here we are using num multiplication equal to 2, it means that I want to assign num equal to num multiply by 2. For example, here we are using this shortcut value, so we put this multiplication value in here in front of the equal sign, and then we are passing 2. That means this is num equal to num multiply by 2. Similar thing you can use using the plus, minus, like that. And a Dart programming language also supports unary operator. That means you can, if you use C++, Java or JavaScript, you can use this unary operator like plus num. This means that increment num value 1 by 1. You can, this is called pre-increment, and this is called post-increment. Both are unary operator. And you can also use another shortcut value like plus equal 1, similar to this unary operator. And for logical operator, you can use this double ampersand sign. So that means this logical and for logical OR you can use this double bar sign. So in Python we use only and or, the English keyword like and or in Python, but in JavaScript, in Dart, we can use this logical and logical OR operator to make two condition based within an if statement. So here we are writing a code like if num greater than 200 and num less than 203, then print 200 to 202. So here we can use the logical AND operator, and in this case both of this part and this part should be true to make this thing happen. For not equal to operator, we can just use this sign and then equal sign. So if I run this program, you see everything is showing correctly in the terminal. Null aware operator is one of the important operator in Dart programming language. Basically, this kind of operator is existed in many modern programming languages like Swift, Kotlin, and in Dart there are 3 variations of this operator. So let's discuss. So suppose we want to define a class. So in this class num, there is a property we declare, that is another num, and where we have assigned 10. And let's define the main function. So here I want to create an object of this class num. So var n equal to num. So to create object of a class in Dart programming language, you just have to use the class name and the parentheses, then the object will be automatically created. So an instance of this num class is created and assigned in this variable, that is n. So n is an object of num class. Let's define another variable. So what we actually want, we want to assign this value in this number variable. Suppose this kind of value comes from another area. Suppose we are using an API. From this API we get this kind of a JSON object, and the JSON object maybe there exists a variable and we want to get that number. So we have to make sure that this n object is not null. So how we do that? Normally what we write, if n not equal to null, then number equal to n dot num, and just print the number. So normally it's a common programming practice that we check that if the object is not null, then access the object properties like it here. So if I run this program, Dart playground, you see it is working perfectly. Suppose this n object is null, we remove this num class name, and if I run this program again, you see it is showing this number has a null object. So there is nothing. Basically when this n object is null, this thing will not access. But if I just remove this if part and if I run this program again, you see now there is an error thrown, that is no such method error. So basically we are accesses n.num, but n is null, that's why it will throw an error and the program will terminate in here. So there is a shortcut in Dart programming language, using that we can avoid this if statement. So what we have to write, we just have to write instead of n.num, we have to write n, a question mark, then dot, then num. So if I run this program again, you see in this case it is showing nothing because there is no n object is null. That's why this thing is not work, and number equals null, that is shown in here. And if there is an object, suppose we create an object in here, the instance of num class, and if I run this program again, you see now it is showing 10, so the number is 10. So basically this null hour operator means that if there is an object, so if n is an object and if the object property num is accessible, then just do it. So that means if n is an object and if n is a valid object, then access the property named num and assign the value from num to here. But if n is not an object, if n is a null object, then just skip this. There is another variation of this null hour operator. So in case if this n is not a valid object, there is nothing happen in here, right? The number will remain null as it is defined. But what we want, if the n object is null, we want a default value have to be assigned in number. So how we can do that? The shortcut way to do that is you use a double question mark and assign a default value. For example, we want to default value 0. So let's save this program and run again. So now you see that when we run this program, the number is printing as 0. That means when this part is null, then this part will be executed. But if we just again put this num here, and if I run this program again, then you see that 10 is printed. So that means now n is a valid object that has a property of num, so that value is assigned in here. But in case n is not a valid object, then in that case the default value 0 will be assigned in number. The third variation of this null hour operator is like this. Suppose we define a variable number, now it is null. If I just print this number and save this program and run, you see it is showing null. But what we want, that we want to make a condition, like if the variable or object is null, we want to assign a default value. So what we can do, that we just use double question mark, then a equal sign all together and put a default value. If I run this program again, you see now it is showing 100. If I run this program after the first print statement, you see the number 100 is showing in the second case as well. So here it is happening is that when the number is not a valid object, that means the number is null, then this 100 will be assigned in this variable, and that is permanent. Okay, so you have to keep mind in this three variation of the null hour operator, because if you do not check null, sometimes your program may crash. So if you know this null hour operator and if you can use it wisely, then it can save in many cases in your program. There is another operator called ternary operator in JavaScript, C++, Java. So that operator is also existed in Dart programming language. So for example, here we defined a program int x equals 100 and var result equals x reminder 2 equal to 0. So that means if we want to define this 100, I mean the value of x by 2. So if there is any reminder, and if that reminder is 0, then print this even, but if the reminder is not 0, then print odd. So in the next line we are printing the result. So if I run this program, you see in this case it is printing even, because x equals 100, which is which is reminded by 2, and there is no reminder. So that means this condition met, and the first part of the of this ternary operator is executed. But if I just make it suppose 101 and run this program again, you see now this condition is not met, that's why this odd is printed. There is a type test operator in Dart programming language. For example, let's define a variable integer x equal 100 or maybe var x equal 100. So we want to know that if x is an integer type, then just print something. So how we can write that program? So we have to type if then x is int, then print integer. So let's save this program and run. You see, as this condition is true, that means we want to check that whether the variable of x is integer type. That's why we have written that if x is int, that means if x is an integer, then print integer and it is true. But if we change the value to suppose a double value, and if I run this program again, then this condition is not true. That's why we did not see any integer is printed in the terminal. Sometimes we want to write a program with some condition. That means if a certain condition is true, then do something, and if certain condition is false, then don't do something. So in Dart programming language, we can write conditional code using if, else, if and else operator. So that means here let's define a program. First we define a variable integer number equals 100. So then we are using the reminder operator. We are checking that if this condition is true, that means if this number is divided by 2 with no dividend, that means equal to 0, then print even. If not, then if it is divided by 3, then print odd. And in other cases, that means if this first condition is not true, second condition is not true, the default cases, then print confused. So let's run this program first. So here it is showing even, then I put here 90 and it is showing even again. So if I put here 91, it is showing confused. So in this scenario, the first condition when met, then the second and third condition, that means else if and else block will not be executed. But if this block is not true, then the program will check this block. If it is not true, then it will check the default block. So this is how we can write if, else, if and else condition in Dart program. There is another way we can write if else statement in Dart programming language, and in this case we have to use the switch statement. So basically switch works similar like if else condition. So here we are defining a variable number where we have assigned value 0, and then in the switch statement within the parenthesis we are checking this number variable, and within the curly braces, this is the body of this switch statement, we are checking that if the value of this variable is 0, then print this and break, then break from this switch statement. In case this condition is not true, then check this condition. If case equals 1, then do this thing and break from the switch statement. If none of the case is true, then just do the default condition. So here let's run this program. It is showing even because this condition met. So if I put here 1 and save this program and run, you see now it is showing odd because this condition is not met, that's why this condition met, that's why it is showing here. But in case if I put different value and run this program, it is showing confused because 0 and 1 is not met, this condition is not met, that's why the default condition is executed. Looping means we want to execute a task for a finite number of time repeatedly. So there are basically 5 kinds of loop in Dart programming language. So the first loop is the standard for loop. Standard for loop. It's similar like in JavaScript. So for example, we want to print 1 to 10. So how we can do that? Let's write a standard for loop. So you have to first type for, then within parentheses let's declare a variable var I equals 1, then semicolon. This is the first part, the or initialized part. Then we write the condition I less than equals to 10. So as long as I less than or equals to 10, then run this loop, and then the increment or decrement part. So here I have written pre-increment plus plus I. So these are the increment or decrement part. So that means when this program is run, this part will be executed first, then it will check the condition in here, and after, and then the body will be executed. Then the program goes to here and increment the value of I, and then check the condition again. If the condition is true, then it will break from the loop, otherwise it will continue the loop. So if I just put print I and run this program, you see it is showing 1 to 10. So this is the standard for loop. There is another for loop that is called for in loop. Suppose we have an array, so var numbers, we define a variable numbers, and using the square bracket, it is a shortcut, that means it's an array. We define some values within this array, 1 2 3, and we want to print all of these values. So using for in loop we can do it easily. So here we are writing for, then var n in numbers, and within the body print n. So here it is meaning that for var n in numbers, so the value of n will be first time 1, second time 2, and third time 3. It will be executed as long as the array contains some values. So if I run this program, you see it is showing 1 2 3. So this is the standard for in loop. If we want to use this array using the standard for loop, we can do that also. For example, for var I equals 0, I less than numbers dot length, then plus plus I, and here print numbers I. So if I run this program, you see in this case 1 to 3 is again printed because we are using the standard for loop. There is another loop that is called for each loop. So basically for each and higher order function. So for example, here like before, we have defined an array with some integer values. So we want to print the each of these value, right? So we can do that using numbers dot for each, and then here we have to define a function. So for example, we want to access each of these value, right? So we can do that like n, and then we can use an arrow function. What is arrow function, I will discuss later. We can also use a normal function here as well, but in this case it looks elegant to use arrow function, and we just write code like this way. If I run this program again, you see it is showing, oh sorry, here I did a mistake. It has to be n. So if I run this program, you see 1 to 3 is printing. So basically this for each is an higher order function because it takes another function as parameter. This full thing is actually a function, but we have written in the short form, that is called arrow function. I will discuss this thing in later in the function part, but just keep in mind that there is another way for looping, especially in array or object, using the for each loop. If you think this arrow function looks a bit complicated for you, you can do another thing. You can define another function like var print num, and here is a parameter, and just print this num. And now instead of this arrow function, just pass this num function, print num function reference. And if I run this program again, you see the same output 1 2 3. Basically we are passing this function as a parameter of this for each higher order function. There is another loop, or the number 4 types of loop is called while loop. Suppose we have defined a variable num equals 5 and we want to print the value of num unless it is 0. So we have to write while, then the condition within parentheses that num greater than 0. So as long as num greater than 0, execute the body, and then we first printing the value of num, and then we decrease the value of num by 1. If I run this program, you see it is showing nothing because I did not save. So let's run again. Then you see that it is showing 5 4 3 2 1. There is another variation of this while loop. So instead of using the condition before, we have to write do in here, and after the body curly braces, you can write the condition, the while condition after this curly braces. So if I run this program again, you see the same output 5 4 3 2 1. If within a loop for a certain condition we want to terminate the loop, we can do this by using break statement. So here in this loop will run 10 times, but here we have written a condition: if I greater than 5, then just break, otherwise print I. If I run this program, you see 0 to 5 is printed, and then when the value of I becomes 6, that is it is greater than 5, then this break statement executed and the loop is terminated. So this is how we can use break statement in any loop to terminate the loop. Suppose we want to write a program to print the odd numbers or even numbers. So in our case, we want to print the odd number. So we have written a loop, a standard for loop. This loop will run 10 times, and here we have written a condition: if I modulus 2 equal to 0. That means if after the division, if there is no remainder, that means 0, then continue. Here continue statement means that don't go the remaining statement, just continue from the loop from here. If I run this program, you see it is showing the odd numbers from the range 0 to 10. So here you have seen that 1 3 5 7 9. So the first time I equals 0 and 0 less than 10. So 0 remainder 2 equal to 0. That's why this condition made true. So the continue statement executed, and the loop goes to here. So I becomes 1, and then the condition is again checking if as 1 is less than 10, and within the body if 1 remainder 2 equal to 0, it is not true. That's why this condition did not meet for the second time. That's why we have seen this 1 is printing in here. So this is how this continue statement works within a for loop. There are 3 built-in collection type in Dart programming language: list, set, and map. So list basically is an ordered collection of values. So it is in some programming language is called array, but in Dart programming language it is called list. So suppose we want to define a list, and we can do that using list class. So when we define list, list, and then we define a variable, so that means this names is an object of list class. And here using the shortcut way, that is means using the square bracket, we can define some value like Jack and Jill. So these two are string items within this list. So if we want to access each of these value, we can do that. So basically in list, the first item is indexed in 0, the second item is 1, and this is how it goes. So if I want to access the first item from this list, we have to write print names, then square bracket 0. If I run this program, you see it is showing Jack, because Jack is stayed within the position or index at 0. If I print 1 and run the program again, in this case it is showing Jill. If we want to know the number of elements existed in the list, we can use the length property of the list object. So here we are printing names dot length. So let's run the program. You see it is showing 2. That means this list object names contains 2 items. Instead of list, if I just put var here and if I run this program, you see it works. In this case, the compiler by type inference will know that this names list is a string type list item. So if I put my cursor in here, you see it is showing list angle bracket string. That means this names is a list and it is known by the type inference. If we want to access each of this item, we can do that by using any for loop, but normally in this case you can use the for in loop. So for var n in names and print n. So if I run this program, you see Jack and Jill is printed. If I want to use mixed item, that means some values will be string, some value may be double, some values may be integer, we can do that as well. So 10, 100.1, and if I run this program, you see each of these value is printed, and if I put my cursor in here, you see now it is showing list and within angle bracket object. But if we want that this list should be a string type, we can do that by defining the replacing this var by list, and within angle bracket we define is string. In that case, if you put any value other than string, it will show an error. So this is a statically typed names list. That means you cannot put other type instead of string. If I run this program, you see it is showing now Jack and Jill. So for statically typed list, you can just put a angle bracket after the keyword list and put the type in here. This list is a mutable type, so that means if we want to change the value of the index 1, we can do that. So names 1, instead of Jill we type like Mark, and if I run this program, you see now it is showing Jack and Mark. So the value is replaced with a new value. But if we want to define each of these value is constant, that means we do not want to change it at runtime, we can do that easily by just putting the const keyword before the square bracket. If I use this program now and run, you see it is showing an error, that unsupported operation, because you cannot change a constant value at runtime. If I remove this part, clear the screen and run the program again, you see there is no error in that case. Suppose we want to copy a list to another list. How we can do that? For example, let's define another list, or just var names 2, and if I just assign this names 1, I mean the names part, and if we access this names 2 and run this program, you see we can still access the value Jack and Jill. But basically when you assign a object like list within another object, it's actually not copied. Instead this names to accessing the names value. So suppose if I change the value of names after assigning this, suppose I change the value of names 1 equal to Mark, and if I run this program again, you see we get that updated value. We are changing that value, replace the value of Jill by Mark in the names variable, and we are looping the names 2 variable, but we can still see this updated value like Jack and Mark. So this is not actually copying, rather both names 2 and names pointing the same list of items. So instead of doing that, if we want to really clone the list, what we can do that using a spread operator in Dart 2.3, we can do that easily. So here we just put a square bracket and then 3 dot and then the first variable name, so names 1. So if I just run this program again, You see, in this case, when we looping names to, we are actually getting the old value Jack and Jill. Basically, in this case, names2 and names does not point to the same list of items. Both names and names2 are totally different items, list items. So this spread operator is similar like JavaScript. I first saw this 3-dot spread operator in JavaScript, and this 3-dot or spread operator is introduced in Dart 2.3. Set in Dart programming language is an unordered collection of unique items, and Dart support for set is provided by set literals and the set type. So suppose we defining a set by var keyword var hello James, and here we have to use the curly braces, and within curly braces we want to put some string value. So we can type fluorine, then chlorine, 2 values. So these are basically unique items. If I copied this fluorine again after the comma, and if I loop this program, so for var x in hello James and print x, and if I run this program, you see it is only showing fluorine and chlorine. So this fluorine, if we put it 2 times, but it is actually stored 1 time, because by definition set is an unique collection of items. There is another way to define set. If you want to define an empty set, you cannot just put like this. Suppose we want to put an empty set, just remove this for loop and remove these curly braces, the items of this curly braces. If I just type print hello James runtime type, and if I run this program, you see in these cases we thought that it should be set type, but instead it became a linked hash map type. So if you want to define a empty set, you must have to define the type name in here. Like you have to put, if I just put string here within angle bracket, now you see it is showing hash set. So just empty curly braces means hash map, but when you define a type before the curly brace, then it become a hash set. And another way to define hash set is like this, that using the set keyword, that means set class. Using the set class, then you can also put this string thing in here, set string, and then if I put a names and curly braces, and if I check the names runtime type, you see it is also hash set. So either way you can define an empty hash set in Dart programming language. In Dart programming language, map basically is a collection of key value pair of items. In some programming language like in Python, it is called dictionary. So let's define a map in Dart programming language. So here I have defined a map, gifts, and the key of each of the item is a string. So here I have defined within single quote first, which by this key we are putting value Patrice, then second turtles, and fifth golden rings. If I want to access each of this item, we can do that easily, like print gifts, and this is also unordered, and if we want to access any of this value, we have to use the key. So for example, here I want to use the key fifth, and if I run this program, you see it is showing golden ring. So this is how we can create map in Dart programming language. Another thing is that you can also use integer value as key, for example 2, 1, 3, and in this case we also remove this fifth, and instead we just put 1 and run this program. You see that it also works without any issue. If you want to define an empty set, if you want to define an empty map, you can do that using the map class. So here we are defining gift as a, and we want to create an instance of map in here and assigning the gifts. And now we want to add key value pairs by ourselves. We can do that by easily, like gifts, then within a square bracket we can put the key, suppose here first as a key, and the value suppose mango. And if I run this program, gifts first, you see it works. So this is how we can create a map in Dart programming language. Another way we can do that using curly braces, and there we have to put the key and the value together. For example, here first, and within after colon we have to put like mango, the value, then another key. So this basically key and this is the value. So this two item becomes a key value pair as a one item within the map. So in the second key we want to put another value like jackfruit. And now we want, if we want to access any of this value like gifts second, and if I run this program, you see it is showing jackfruit. So this is how we can create a map in Dart programming language. In Dart programming language, each function is an object of class function, where f is the capital letter. So let's define a function. For example, we want to defining a function as square, which we can use to square any integer or num type, any integer or double value. So for this reason we want the return type should be dynamic. So when you define a function, at the first part you have to define the type which it will return. If there is this, if a function does not return anything, you can use void, or you can skip the void, which means it does not return anything. So in this case we are putting dynamic, then the function name is square. We also take any value. So this function can take parameters. So if we want to, if you want that a function take parameter, we have to define that. So here we are defining var num. So this function will take a parameter as num, and this function will return the num into num. So whatever we pass any valid integer or double value in this square function, it will multiply that by the same value and return the value. So let's define another function. For example, void show output, and here we take define a variable as parameter var message. So this function takes message as parameter, and using the built-in print function it will print the message as in the terminal. So now let's call this function first, show output, and within this function we want to use this function square. So here we are typing square, where we are putting 2. If I run this program, you see it is showing 4. Then we use the same statement, but in this case we are putting 2.5, and let's run this program. You see now it is showing 4 and 6.25. As we define this function, this square function, as dynamic, so that means this function can return any type of num value, like any type of integer or double value. And another thing, if I just type print and square this function name without parentheses and runtime type, and let's run this program, you see this is showing that this function square is a dynamic type. In Dart programming language, there is a shortcut way to defining a function, which is a one-line statement. So for example, here in Dart programming language you have to use a equal sign and greater than sign together to make a arrow. This is called fat arrow, and sometimes called fat arrow expression. So here we defined a full function, right? The dynamic square var num, and within curly braces we define a body. We can make it shorter using arrow function. So instead of this, just remove this arrow part, and return part and just put a arrow here. So here what we are defining that dynamic square var num, then arrow expression num multiply num. So when you write an arrow function like this way, the result of the value after the computation will automatically return. So if I save this program and run again, you see this program works as like before. A function that has no name, or in short you can call nameless function, is called anonymous function in Dart programming language. In some other programming language like in Python it is called lambda, or in some programming language it is called closure. So here let's define a list with some string values of item, and we want to use the for each function of this list. So let's type list.forEach. This is a higher order function because for each function can take other function as parameter. So within the body we will define a anonymous function. So before defining anonymous function in here, let's define a named function. So suppose I am defining a function void printf which take a parameter item, and just using the print built-in function, it just print the value of the item variable in the screen, and here we just want to pass this printf function as reference. So if I run this program, you see it is showing apple, bananas and orange. But in this case, or sometimes when you define a for each function with a shorthand function, then in many cases computer programmers do not define a name function. Instead they prefer to use anonymous function within the places. So to do that, let's cut this part and remove the named function part, and here remove this printf and put that thing in here. So if I save this program, clear the screen and run the program again, you see it works. So that means this function is an anonymous function because this function does not have any name. There are two types of parameters in function in Dart programming language like Python programming language. So one type of parameter is called positional parameter or positional argument, and the second type is called named parameter or named argument. So let's see the positional argument or positional parameter first. So here we are defining an arrow function which takes two parameters. So in this case we are using the positional argument. So here num1 is the first position, num2 is the second position, and we just returning after combining the value. If I run this program, you see it works. It is showing 4. Now here if you look carefully, you see that when we call this sum method, we just passing the value and we expect that these two will be assigned in num1 and these two will be assigned in num2 because we are using the positional argument or positional parameter. Let's convert this function, this arrow function, to named parameter. So in that case we have to use the curly braces here. So we want that these two parameters should be as named parameter, and when I put curly braces in here, you see it is showing red color in here. So if I just remove this thing and if I call sum, now you see that it is showing num1 and num2. If I put num, for example in this case, if I want to put num2 first, so I have written num2 colon then suppose 4, and then I want to put num1 suppose 2. If I save this program and run this again, you see it is showing 6. So when you are using named parameter, you have to use the name of the parameter when you are calling the function, and this basically works for not only arrow function but also for a general function. Another interesting thing of name parameter is that by default named parameter is optional, and we can also mix positional parameter and named parameter together. For example, in this case we want to change a bit. We want that the num2 is only named parameter, but the num1 is positional parameter, and num2 may be optional. Right. So in this case, when we want to call this function sum, then we have to put the value as the first parameter. Suppose I am putting 10, and as this named parameter, for this name parameter I use the name num2, and suppose I put 2, and if I run this program, you see it is showing 12. But I told before that when you define a variable, when you define a parameter as named parameter, by default that is optional. That means if you do not provide any value for num2, it should work, right? But it is crashing. Why? We defining this num2 parameter as optional by defining this as a named parameter, but when there is no value but we are still accessing this value. So as this num2 may be optional, what we can do, we can write a conditional null operator like :0. So if I change this modification in here, and if I run this program again, you see it is also showing an error, because I think I have to put a parenthesis to give the priority. And now if I run this program again, you see there is no error. So in this case, when we do not provide the named parameter value, and in the function body we are checking that whether num2 is null or not. If it is null, then just pass the default value as 0. Otherwise, if there is any value, just use that. So if I again use this statement print and sum, and here I put another value 10 2 and num2. So you see it is showing 10 and 12. If you want that if no value is provided, we can use any default value. So instead of using this, we can do a shortcut default value parameter. So here after num2 we put a equal sign and put a default value. So if we change this function here, and if I run this program again, you see there is no error, because when there is no parameter, no value for num2 parameter, it is using the 0 in here. So 0 plus 10, that is 10. And when we pass any value like 2, then in this case the default value will not be used, and 10 plus 2 will be 12. So this is showing in here. I told that by definition named parameter are optional, right? But if you are using a positional parameter and you want to make any of them as optional, then how you can do that? So for example, here we want to make this num2 as optional, but this is a positional argument or positional parameter. So to make it optional, we just have to put a square bracket outside of the parameter, and now this num2 become optional. So if I run this program, you see it is showing 4 and 2. So at the first time we are passing 2 values, and the second time we are passing 1 value. So in that case that num2 become null, and here as we are using null operator, so the default value 0 will be used in the second case. In object-oriented programming, class is a very important topic. Using class, we can define our own custom type. We can encapsulate the related values and related methods together. And when you define a class, you can inherit to make some subclass. Also, you can do some other thing like you can use polymorphism. You can reuse your object-oriented code for other purpose. So in Dart programming language, we can create a custom type using the class keyword. So let's define a class. So here we are defining a class named person. So to define a class in Dart, you have to use the keyword class, then the class name, and within curly braces we are defining the body. So basically class is a blueprint for an actual object. This is not object, this is we are defining the type. That means we are defining a person class or person type, and later in the main function we will use the object of this person class. So in this person class or blueprint, we want that a person should have a name, a person should have a age, just basic to type. Okay, and now let's define a method in here. So when you define a function within a class, that is called method. So here we are defining a method void. This function or this method returns nothing, and then show output the function name, which is called method name in the context of class, and this method does not take any parameter and it just print the value of name and age. And now let's create an object. So here we can create object in two ways. Suppose we want to use this person name in here, so person class name in here, and then person1 and then person. So when you use the parenthesis after the class name, basically it will instantiate an object and assign that object to this person1 object variable, right? So if I just want to access this show output method, I can write person1 dot show output. Basically it will print nothing, I mean to null. If we want to access this variable name and age, we can do that like person1 dot name, suppose my name Mahmoud, and person1 dot age, my age suppose 35. So if I run this program again, it is showing Mahmoud and 35. Now let's create another person object, but before that we want to use a constructor which is called default constructor. So what is that? So let's define a constructor. So basically constructor is also a method without any return type. So and in Dart programming language you have to use the class name as constructor name. So here we want to defining a constructor, and constructor method is automatically called when you instantiate an object. So here in this case we want to pass two parameters, string name, and the second parameter is optional, int age, and by default it should be 18 if there is no age is provided. And as this name parameter name and the class properties name are same, if we want to access the objects or instance fields, in this case we have to use the this keyword. This means this object's name or this object's age. Also we can call this using this we can also call the method defined within the class. So here we want to use this dot name equals name and this dot age equals age. So if any name and age is provided when we create the instance of a class, we will pass the values and the values will be assigned the object or instance fields. So now when we defined a constructor, you see now it is showing an error because it expects that I have to pass at least one name. So here I just passed suppose Mahmoud, and after saving the program, if I run this program, you see it is showing Mahmoud and 18 because I did not pass any age, that's why it is taking the default value. But if I pass any age like 35, you see now it is showing Mahmoud 35. So this is called default constructor. Another shortcut way to write a constructor, basically constructor is using to assign some values when the class instance is created. If the parameter name is same as the properties or fields name within the class, we can use the shortcut way. So instead using this body, we can just use here this dot name and here this dot age and a default value. So if I run this program again, you see it works. And in case if I do not want to provide this 35 and run this program again, you see it works again. It is showing Mahmoud 18. So if in your constructor, other than initializing the values, you want to do something else, if there is no other thing you want to do within the constructor body, you can skip that curly braces part and only use this way to shortcut the constructor. Let's define another object. So in this case, I am going to using the var keyword and person2, and I give the person, I want to name Jack and the age is suppose 25, and let's person2 and call the show output method. Let's clear the screen and let's run the program. You see in the first case it is showing Mahmoud 18 and the second case it is showing Jack 25. So basically this person1 and person2 is totally different instance of the same class, that is person class. And here as we are using var keyword, but in the right side after equal sign we are using the person class. So using the type inference, the compiler will automatically know that this person2 basically an object of the person class. Other than default constructor, there is another constructor that is called named constructor. So when you define a constructor like this way, like the class name as the constructor, then this constructor will automatically called. That is why it is called default constructor. But sometimes we may need to instantiate an object of a class with some different kinds of values, right? Then how we can do that? There is another way. Suppose we want to define a named constructor. If you defined other constructor beside the default constructor, that is called named constructor. To define a named constructor, you have to use the class name. So here person, then you have to put a dot and then the constructor name. So we want to name the constructor as guest. And here we want to assign some values. So here name equal to guest and age equal to 18. Okay, so let's create another object var person3 person and dot guest. In this case you see I am not passing any values, that's why it is not calling that default constructor. Instead it is I am calling the guest constructor. And if I run this person3 dot show output method and run this program, you see in the third cases it is showing guest and 18 for the person3 object. So this is how we can create other constructor beside default constructor. Normally what happens when we define a variable either explicitly or within a class, we can change the value at any time if we want, right? But if we want that we will define a field or properties or variable within a class and that will be unchangeable after initializing, then we can do that by using the final keyword. So here we define a class X, capital X, and within the class in the body we are defining a variable named name. So and we are using the keyword final, and then we are defining another variable named age where we have assigned 10, and before defining the variable we are using the keyword static and const. So I will discuss all of these three things: final, static and static const. And then within the class default constructor we are just assigning the value passing to the constructor in the named variable. So let's create an object. So var x capital X and then pass the value Jack. And now if I print x dot name and run this program, you see it is showing Jack. So suppose I want to change the value of name, x dot name equals something else like Jill, and I want to print the x dot name again. Basically it is showing that name can be used as a setter because it is final. So the Dart extension in this Visual Studio Code editor can detect that error. But if I just remove this final thing and just use var name and run this program, you see first time it is showing Jack and the second time it is showing Jill. So the key point here is that if you want to define any properties as a constant, you can use the final keyword, and using the default constructor, when you assign the value, you cannot change the value after assigning it in the second time. So only first time you can assign the value using the default constructor or any named constructor. There is two ways to define a value when we defining a variable as constant. One is using final keyword, another is using const keyword. When you are using const keyword, that is a compile time constant. It cannot be changed anytime at runtime. But when you are using final keyword within a class, you can change it using the constructor. So this is possible at runtime. And if you want to use any constant value using the constructor within a class, you must have to put static in front of that const variable. So here we are using static const int as 10, and if I want to access the value of age, we can write print x.age, and it will not work because this is a compile time constant and we are using within the class. And as this is a static variable, we have to use the class name to access the property, and this is called class property. This name is called object property because this name is different for different object, but the static property is same for all object or all instance, but because it's a class property. So here you have to put the capital X dot age, and if I run this program, you see it is showing 10. So suppose I want to create another object, var x, suppose var y equal to x Jill, and y print y dot name, and you see that for x object and y object the name value is different, but as this property is based on class, so we have to access that property using the class name dot property, and this is same for all instances. So the age 10 is same for both x object and y object. If we want to use the const and final outside of the class, we can also do this. So let's remove this class part and remove this thing, and suppose we want to define two constant values. So final var name, suppose the name is something Mahmoud, and in this case you do not have to use the var because it is this name will be a string by type inference. And let's define another value, const name, suppose age equal to 30. Let's print name and print age, and if I run this program after clearing the terminal, you see it works, and we cannot change any of this. Name equal to something else cannot possible, also age equal to something cannot possible. It will be showing an error because here you see it is showing that name is a final variable and age is also a constant variable which cannot be reassigned. And in this case, outside of the class, both final and const actually works like same. There is no difference, so you can use anything, a final or const outside of the class. When we define a class and later we want to add some extra feature within the class, but that extra feature is not required for all the instance of the original class, then we can use the class inheritance. And in Dart program, using the extend keywords, you can inherit a class. So here we are defining a class vehicle where there is two property, model and year, and in the default constructor when we pass a model and year, in this default constructor we are assigning that model value using this dot model will be in this model, and this dot year, the passing year will be assigned in year, and within the default constructor body we are just printing the model and year, nothing else. and there is another method show output, just it prints the model and year. If we want to use this here, that's also okay. Basically this means the instance which it is called. Now we are defining another class car, and that inherit this vehicle class, right, by using the extend keyword. And here we are defining a new property that is called double price. And in this default constructor, in the car constructor, what we are taking 3 parameter, right, string model, year, and this dot price. So here there is an interesting thing. So the interesting thing is that this price is the new thing of this car, but this car as inherits the vehicle, so this model and year also existed within the car class. So what we are doing, we are when we create an instance of this car class, we are assigning the price value directly in this variable using the this.price, but for the model and year we want to pass that values using in the vehicle constructor. And to do that in Dart, you have to use a colon operator after the parenthesis of the subclass default constructor, and you have to use the super keyword, and using super keyword you have to pass the value. So here when we are calling this after colon, we are calling this super, then within parenthesis model and year, this model and year will be passed to this constructor vehicle, right? So, and in this car class we are also defining a method show output, and in the show output we want to call this method, that means super class method. And here we are calling this super keyword, we are using this super keyword, then dot, then the method name. So basically super dot show output means we are calling this method, the super class method, and then we are printing the this car's price. Now here we are creating an object car1 equals car, not vehicle object. We are creating a car1 car object. We are passing Accord as a model, 2014 as the year, and 150,000 as the price. And then we are calling car1 show output. So if I run this program, you see it is showing Accord 2014, because when the instance of this car is created, then we are calling basically this car constructor. And here we are passing 3 value, right, Accord 2014 and 150,000. So to Accord will be in here, 2014 will be here, positional argument, and 150,000 will be here. And as we are using this dot price and there is a property name price as the same name, so this 150,000 will be assigned as the price of this car. And after colon on the default constructor, as we are calling super model here, this Accord and 2014 will be passed to this vehicle and will be assigned this model and year. And then when we call this car1 dot show output, you will see this method is called. Here we are calling the super method, super class method show output, where it will be printed model and year. So you see here model and year is printed, and then this price is printed in here. So we are seeing this price in here. So this is how we can inherit or extend a superclass to a subclass. Method overriding is, suppose in a class there is a method, and in the subclass here in Y class extend this S class, we want the same method to redefine. That is called method overriding. If you want that other programmers know that this method is overriding, you can use @override annotation. So when you use @override in front above a method signature, that means the compiler will know that this method is overriding, and in any case there is no method of the original name, it will show an error that method does not override an inherited method. This is basically a safety feature in Dart programming language. When you overriding a method, if you do not use the @override keyword, it will not show an error. There is no issue for this. You have to use override when you don't have control of superclass method implementation. Basically, the intent of the override notation is to catch situation where a superclass renames a member, an independent subclass which used to override the member could silently continue working with the superclass implementation. So the good practice is, if you override a superclass method, you just use the @override annotation. Getters and setters are special methods that provide read and write access to an object properties. Normally, each instance variable has an implicit getter plus a setter if appropriate. But if you want, you can create additional properties by implementing getters and setters using the get and set keyword. So here we define a class rectangle where we are using the num object. So basically num means it's a type, and that is inherited by the integer and double type. So here we are defining num left, top, width and height. So the value of left, top, width and height can be integer or double, and in the default constructor we are just assigning the values passed and assign in the properties. Now we are defining two getters, that is right and bottom, and two setters for each of them. So to defining a getter, we are defining a the getter name right, and use the get keyword before the name, and then we are providing the return type. And here we are using an arrow function, and what it will do, if we call this right getter, we will get left plus width, these two variables data, and we will get this value. And if we want to make a setter, we have to use the set keyword and the setter name. So here it is right, and we are passing any value, num value, and we are putting the left value. So using the arrow function, what we are doing, we are assigning left equals value minus width. So we have a we are passing a value right, and what we are doing, we are doing a customization. So we are minusing that width value from the value, and that assigning that value in the left variable within the class. Similarly, we are doing the same thing as for bottom. And now we are creating an object rect using the rectangle class name and passing some values, and then we are printing the rect.left value. Let's run this program. We are seeing that the left value is 3, and then we are calling the getter method, that is right. So rect.right equals 12. When we defining a method, we have to use the parenthesis, but when we are using the getter or setter, we do not need to use any parenthesis. Like when we want to access any getter, we just have to use the dot operator, and when we want to use a setter, we just call the setter name and the equal sign, and in that case the value will be assigned as a setter. So here when we are calling rect.right equals 12, so that 12 comes in here, and value minus, so value is 12, and it minus width, so width is here, that is 20. So value is 12 minus 20 equals minus 8. So that's why when we are printing rect.left, we are getting this minus 8 output. So this is how we can define getter and setter in Dart programming language. Exception handling is a feature in a programming language by which we can know that if there is any runtime problem occurred or not. So in Dart, if we want to use exception handling, we can use the throw, try, catch, finally keyword. So suppose here we are defining a function must greater than 0. So this function, if it gets a value greater than 0, then there is no problem, it will return the value. But if it gets a value equal to 0 or less than 0, then it will throw an exception. And to throw an exception, you have to use the throw keyword and the exception class name, and within the exception class name you can provide a message. You see that the method definition is showing above the cursor. If a function throws an exception, you have to catch that, otherwise the program will terminated. So we defining another function, let verify the value, where we can pass any value, and within the function we are defining a value verification variable where we will assign the value. So as this math function must greater than 0 can throw an exception, so we have to define this function within the try block. So here within the try block we are using value verification equal must greater than 0, and we are passing the value. So if there is an error occurred, then we are just printing the error by catching the error in here, catch within the parentheses, we can catch any type of exception here, and then in the finally block, which is basically an optional block, we are checking something like if this value verification is null, because if in any case if this mark greater than 0 function returns an error, then in that case this value verification will be null, right? By definition it is null, and if it's success, then it will this variable will get the value. So in the finally block, we are checking that if that is null, that we are printing value is not accepted, otherwise we are printing value verified, and using the string interpretation we are passing the value. So let's run this program. You see in first cases it is showing value 10, but when in the second case when we are passing the value 0, in the first case it is printing value verified by 10, but in the second case it is this catch block basically captured this exception that value must be greater than 0. You see this message is printing in here, but after the exception word. And then in the finally block we also captured the value, I mean the message, and here it is printed value is not accepted. Basically when you use the catch keyword and within the parentheses you use any parameter like e, it basically handles all kinds of error, but if your program has a specific type of error, you can use the on keyword. So after the try block you have to use on, then the exception name, then if you have another type of error then you can use on and that exception name, and sometimes anything else that is an exception you can use like this, on exception catch e. So this is another pattern, but normally I prefer, or in the most cases I use the try catch block or try catch finally block. I normally do not use the on exception thing unless it is very important for the particular program. So this is the fundamental concept of Dart programming language. If you know this feature, you can learn some other Dart programming language features which I did not discuss in this lesson. If I discuss all the features of Dart programming language in this video, then it will be very lengthy video. That's why I discuss only the most important features of Dart programming language, so that you can understand the Dart programming language very easily and can work with any Dart programming language related work. Especially if you want to be a Flutter developer, you must have to know all the fundamental features of Dart programming language. So I hope that this video will help you to understand Dart programming language, and if you know JavaScript, Python, C or C++ or any other programming language, you will find that Dart programming language is not very difficult to learn. I found that it is normally quite easy to understand the feature of Dart programming language, though there are some feature which a bit twisted or something new is created in this programming language, but overall Dart programming language is very easy programming language. So I hope this video will help you to understand it better, and there are some advanced features which if it required in future I will create more videos on that if in my Flutter application development series tutorial. So I hope you will enjoy this video, and if you have any question just ask me in the comment section, and if you like this video just share with your friends. So thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.